Okay, so we are here back in REPL, and we're going to do the if-else statement in C. Okay, so we're going to do a new file here. We're going to call it if-else.c. Okay, and we get our boilerplate, or sorry, we don't get our boilerplate. So we're going to put in our boilerplate. Include. Notice that I've turned on code suggestion, code intelligence. They call it IntelliSense. That's what Microsoft called it. But so it's just code completion, right? Okay, so include. We're gonna do standard IO. Okay, and then of course we have to have our main function, right? So we have an int space main. In parentheses, we're just going to put void just to say not void. We're going to put void. And then we're going to add our code block in for our main function. Okay, so that's kind of our first thing. We know that we have a return of 0 if the function completes correctly. So that's basically our boilerplate for what we're going to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our if. So we're going to get some input. So we're going to declare an integer, and that integer is going to be called number. And then we're going to get some input from the, we're going to call puts, and we're going to prompt the user to say, guess my number. Okay, and then we're going to scanf. Okay, and to scanf, what we're going to do is we're going to then get the input from the user. Okay, we're telling scanf, hey, it's going to be an integer, and when you get that integer, load it into the variable number. Okay, so that's kind of our we're just getting some input to mess with to feed into our if statement. All right. Okay, remember that our number. We're supposed to get a pointer. We're supposed to give scanf a pointer, right? Which we will talk about later, possibly. And basically, we can feed it an address instead, and it will be happy with that. Okay, so let's just go ahead and run this. Remember, we're gonna once we have some code that we think will work. Okay, just kind of our minimum amount of code, we're going to go ahead and run it. Rather than running it, clicking the run button, we're actually going to go open shell. And we're just going to interact with the shell instead, okay? So I'm in this project is called tutorial. We're going to do ls to list. Notice that I have my if-else.c right here. Okay, so I'm going to call gcc. So gcc space the name of the file I want to compile, if-else.c. And then my -o, not -0, lowercase o, is the output. Traditionally, we just do the same file name with no extension for Linux, okay? In Windows, it would be .exe. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and I'm going to get a bunch of errors because I as usual, forget to put all of my semicolons on. Okay, it compiled just fine. So we now have if I do ls again, we now have our executable if-else here. So I can go ahead and run that by doing /if-else, just the name of the executable, and hitting enter. Guess my number. I guess 10. Great, it ran just fine. Okay, so now we have our input. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and do our if statement. So we want to react to that input somehow. We want to do some flow control on the program to skip some lines of code and run other lines of code, basically. Okay, so we want to put an if statement in. Okay, so now if I one thing that new users have a problem with, if I put number equals 11, okay, that means that I'm assigning the value of 11 to the variable number. Number is now 11. But for my if statement, I'm not going to use a single equal sign ever. Okay, it's never going to occur. So I'm going to go if, and then in parentheses is going to be my condition. Okay, and I'm going to say if number is less than 10, then I'm going to do something. Okay, so I have some code here. And in this case, I'm just going to put puts you guessed too low. Okay, if number is less than 10, I put you guessed too low, all right? Okay, so what does this do? Okay, so basically, if the number is less than 10, so as the code is running, it executes every line. It declares an integer, it finds the main function, executes line and find, it declares the value. It puts out guess my number, it sits and waits until scanf, until the user hits enter after writing a number. Remember, we don't want our return, sorry, I left my return. Return should be the very last thing, or your function will end. And then it gets to line 9, okay? On line 9, the program executes line 9, and what it does is it turns this value into either a true or a false, okay? So the condition inside the if statement is a Boolean statement. It can only be true or false. It doesn't matter how long, doesn't matter how complicated, it is true or false. That's what it evaluates to. If it's true, then the code block below the if statement executes. If not, it skips down to line 13 in this case, okay? So basically, if the number is less than 10, if it's like a 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, okay, it's going to be a whole number because it's an integer. If any of those conditions are true, if the number variable is holding any of those values, this condition will be true, and then line 11 will be executed. Otherwise, it just skips down and starts executing at line 13. It just skips the code block. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. I ran it instead of compiling it. Okay, I'm down here in my shell. Just hit the up arrow twice, 3 times. So here's my GCC. I'm just going to compile again. And I forgot my semicolon again. We're going to compile again. Enter. It compiles just fine. We're going to execute it now. Guess my number. Okay, so now let's say that I guess an 8. Enter. You guessed too low. Okay, so it was true, right? It executed. So what happened was the number got set. Scanf stored my 8 that I typed in into number. It got to the line 9 for the if statement. That evaluated to true, and therefore it played line 11. Let's try it again. So let's execute if else again. This time I'm going to guess 11. No, you guessed too low. Great. Okay, fantastic. All right. Okay, so now let's say that we have more than one case. So we don't want to just test if it's less than 10. We want to go ahead and we want to test if it's also, say we want another case where we want it to test if the number is greater than 10. Okay? And in this case, we want to say the same exact thing, except we want to say, you guessed too high. All right, so let's try it. So now, if we get to line 9, and let's say we typed in an 11, okay? Line 9, the condition for the if statement will evaluate to false. That means line 10 and 11 and 12 will be skipped. It will go down to the next if else and execute there. If it was 11, right, this will turn to true. If the condition is true, it will execute the code block below it and go and execute line 15, okay? What happens if it's a less than 10 though? What if I type 8, what happens? Well, if I type 8, then line 9 turns to true, line 11 is executed, and then the rest of the if-else statement is skipped. So this if-else if is all one big statement, all right? So if line 9 is true, only the code block beneath this if statement executes, and then it just skips everything else in the else if. It doesn't even look at the conditions on these, okay? So the first if-else if statement where the condition is true, that's the one that executes. All right, let's go ahead and try it. Okay, we have to compile again because we changed our code. And execute, guess my number. Okay, 11, you guessed too high. Compile again. Whoops, I didn't have to compile again. I could have just executed. I'll do 9. You guessed too low. Okay, whoops, didn't have to compile again, but I did. Execute again. What if I guess 10? Up. Nope. It doesn't give any answer. Okay? Now, because it's an integer, we have another case, right? Our case, this case is we basically covered every single integer except 10, right? Because it has to be a whole number, so it's either less than 10, greater than 10, or 10. So in this case, we can do an else. And interestingly enough, our else, even though else is a catch-all, right? Else means if it doesn't execute, or sorry, if none of the conditions evaluate to true, we finally fall all the way through the if statement and get to the else. And if we hit the else, then it will automatically run the code block below else if we get all the way down to it. Okay? And we're going to say, you guessed my number. Okay. So that's if it's 10, right? All right. So we're going to go ahead and just try that out. Okay, we're going to recompile, re-execute. Guess my number. I guess a 10 this time. You guessed my number. Great. Okay. All right, so now what we're going to take a look at, the other thing we're going to cover here with if, okay, now this condition could be let's say that instead we wanted to do just if, let's change our condition around a little bit, okay, and let's say if my number is equal to 10, so I'm just going to test for equality. If my number equals 10, I'm going to say, hey, you guessed my number, okay, that's pretty straightforward, right? Okay. And then we're going to go, we want something a little bit more specific here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go if number is, we want to tell them if they're close or not. So we're going to say if number is greater than 8, and notice my and is a double ampersand, so I'm now combining them, right? My number is greater than 8 and number is less than 10, you guessed close. Okay, so we guessed close. We want an even more complicated one though, okay? So we want to know if it's close. We want to know if they're like within 2 of the number they're trying to guess, okay? So if number is greater than 8 and less than 10, you guessed close, okay? So our other thing here, so we can create kind of a more complicated if statement here, right? So we can say, okay, if number is greater than 8 and less than 10, or it's double pipes for our or, okay? And we can say number is greater than 10, greater than 10, and less than 12. You guessed close. Okay, else number greater than 12, you guessed way too high. Else if number less than 8, you guessed way too low. All right, so let's take a look at what I've done here, all right? So basically what I've done is I'm combined 2 conditions here with an and. So it's greater than 8 and less than 10, okay? Then it's going to, so say if I put a 7, this would be false, right? And number is greater than 10, less than 12, this would also be false, so this would get skipped, right? Okay, but if it is 9 or 10, nope, I'm wrong, only 9. Look at that. We're going to say greater or equal to 8, and we're going to say less than or equal to a 12, so we get a bit of a better range. So this would be 8 and 9, this would be 11 and 12, right? Okay? So just take a look at this for a second and just kind of feel what it's supposed to be, right? So basically this, I'm trying to get a range where it evaluates to true if it's 8 or 9, right? And this evaluates to true if it's 11 or 12, okay? The or condition here means that it will be true if only one of those is true, all right? So when you start to use ands and ors, what you have to remember is and, every single condition connected by an and has to be true for the whole thing to evaluate as true. Or only one condition has to be correct for all, if you have a bunch of conditions connected by or, then only one of them has to be true for the whole thing to be true, okay? All right, and then finally, okay, now we don't have an else in this case. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and test it one time just to see how it works. Okay, so if we do a 7, let's say, or let's say an 8, you guessed close. Okay, so there it goes. All right, so by understanding, so let's just review just quickly on these conditions, okay? In an if-else statement, you have an if with a condition, and then you have any number of else ifs also with a condition, okay? If none of those conditions are true and you have an else at the bottom, that's the default. It will automatically run its code block if it reaches the else, okay? Each condition is either true or false. Even it doesn't matter how complicated. This whole thing eventually evaluates to true or false. The condition must be true or false, okay? If you have conditions connected by or statements, only one has to be true for the whole thing to be true. If you have conditions connected by and statements, everything has to be true for the condition to be true, okay? You can separate things. So notice that if I want to combine ands and ors, I use parentheses to confine those conditions, okay? So basically, it's the same thing as order of operations in algebra. Basically, the things inside the condition inside the parentheses will evaluate first and then be combined, as the parentheses go out. Okay, so I hope this helped on if statements.